Well, hello on a winter day to you. Happy 2025, Professor Jen here. Always love to thank Captioning Services for everything that they do for us, as I really don't have the skill set in which to do the taping, the talking, the captioning, and so we need these very important, relevant people. So today, of course, in line with the syllabus, always happy to bring you some thoughts, observations, and our coffee chat series here. Very casual thoughts to you for you. Today, my topic is going to be a brief overview on observation regarding beauty and what it means to be beautiful and attractive, etc. Of course, in Shakespeare's plays, and then give you some kind of an insight where I'm coming from as it relates to pop culture and the contemporary. So, of course, in Shakespeare's time, as in many, it really rang true that people that were considered beautiful and attractive were closer to nobility. So you say, well, how is that possible? This alignment between attractiveness and perhaps social rank, political rank, etc. Let's look at the time and place of Shakespeare. Back then people really didn't have, uh, access to all kinds of bathrooms, access to all kinds of lotions, potions, perfumes, going to the salon, tanning studios, tanning beds, spray tans, etc. All the things that we have today. So back then, beauty was something that was not only hard to get, but certainly hard to maintain. I think often about how back in those days, Shakespeare's time, the relevance of having to go get things ready for dinner. Today, like I talk to myself and laugh and I say, oh, I'm sort of an urban hunter in a way. The idea that I go to Wegmans or any other grocery store and I hunt for my chicken in a package, I'm not close to the killing of the chicken. I'm not plucking the chicken, but I do have to go find the chicken and I bring the chicken, I go home, I cook it. Okay, back in those days, it wasn't that case. It was very hard to maintain personal grooming, personal beauty. I think often of some of the cultural uh, traditions we have, like in weddings, where we have this tradition of, a bridal bouquet. If anybody knows about the history of the bridal bouquet really started from the idea that so few persons had access to daily bathing, daily showering. Some people didn't bathe in many cultures, in many centuries for months. The idea that a bride will hold some kind of flowers before her body arrives, right, to have the bouquet. The idea that perhaps that's what everybody would be smelling rather than her personal decay from not having, frequent shower, frequent access to bathing. So this idea that beauty is really part of nobility is something I think that even resonates today. We see it often in Hollywood. We see it often in France. We see it often in Italy, Spain. The idea, the notion that people that have the money to put themselves together perhaps have far more opportunity. The idea of dressing for success, what it takes to put somebody together, either for a job interview, etc. Why? Because very often we judge people, all of us do to some degree, we judge people by their appearance, how it is that they look, what it is that they have. Some cultures and contexts today, if you look at some different cultures around the globe, people that are wearing, exceptional amounts of gold, exceptional amounts of silver, exceptional amounts of platinum, you know, they can have the worst clothing on, or tribal clothing, or custom clothing that relates to their culture. But if they have these precious heavy metals, perhaps they're seen in a much grander scale. We look at this whole idea in contemporary culture, really since the 1930s in our country, the idea of a diamond, this carbonized material where, the bigger the better. I think often about the 1980s as a time period where if we looked in television, fashion, the idea that bigger was better, heavy shoulder pads, men were wearing very pronounced suits, the idea of opulence, the more the better, maximalism, etc. I think we see so much of this from Shakespeare's writings as well. You know, people that had all of these things to attend to. They had property and they had all kinds of animals and they had all kinds of territory. And the more they had, the more they were. You know, and here we are today in culture, and I think to myself, the more we have, the more we're sometimes weighed down, you know? Life cycle is so funny. When we're very young, we want to get more. And when we're in middle age, we want to get more. And when we enter sort of later in life, we want less. And then we try to get rid of the more that we were so busy trying to achieve. The idea of minimalism, not judging people by what it is that they own. I think to myself too about the contemporary view of this whole movement of container homes, tiny homes. It's just so interesting to me, juxtapositioned against Shakespeare and all of his largeness, his grandness, these necessary rooms, voluminous amounts of space, or we call today square footage disease. You know, when we hear people talk about a house, we hear, you know, 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet. We hear people today building homes 5,000 square feet for the average person's consumption. Whereas 1960s, 1970s in this country, the average home was 1,000 square feet. So I think about Shakespeare's characters. I think about all of this post-colonial structuralism, you know, as it relates to these four theories I keep referencing. You know, the idea of being self-referential. I read this interesting quote that said, the one good thing about reading is that if you don't like where you are currently in your life, just pick up a book and you'll find yourself someplace else very quickly. You know how it is that we go to these texts, we go to plays and we say, you know, how would I find myself living in this kind of condition? How would I feel if I had all this opulence? Tell you where I think about it often in contemporary literature as we talk about the canon again, you know, the great sanctuary space of all of this comparative literature, these milestone authors that we keep talking about. I'm going to talk about a few today before I leave off with you. About beauty, space, opulence, how we define beauty, how we define what's important, relevance. I have a picture up for you today. You probably looked at it already. That's one of my favorites. My son Sergey and I have done quite a bit of camping in this region. It's called Letchworth State Park, about 60 miles south of RIT. Takes about 4 days to get through the entire park. They have camping, tent camping, backpack camping, hike camping. Some people car camp. You can rent cabins. But clearly, the reason people come to this place, Letchworth Park, as I show you this picture, one of the pictures of many, is because it really is so beautiful. It's big, it's expansive, it's regal, it has status as far as topography is concerned. It's important topography. It has water, it has access to sun, has access to some caves, some hollow, etc. It's really got everything. In fact, Letchworth State Park garners far more visitors than people realize, as Niagara Falls is one of the most popular places visited in the United States. We don't hear about that often. But it reminds me of my subject today. So I want to talk now about something more contemporary, having laid it out for you about Shakespeare's time, about beauty and wealth, and he who has the most gold makes the rules. Tennessee Williams again. In his play, of course, we could look at Glass Menagerie. Exact opposite. Tennessee has these wonderful characters that are all squished into this very small apartment. And the apartment is missing all kinds of things. It's missing updatedness. It's missing extra furniture. It's missing really a full ice box. It's missing all of these luxuries and activities of daily living. It really expresses to us, the audience, transforms us into a place called they're really living hand to mouth. Very, very different from many of the characters that we see in traditional Shakespeare plays. You say, well, what does this have to do with the theories? This whole idea of post-colonial structure, this whole idea of capitalism, really race, classism. It's really also a sociological discussion, including a political discussion. The idea of the glass ceiling, how far can any of us really go? You know, we have two schools of thought I can think of. One would be we are what we're able to buy. I mean, capitalism in America is sort of based on that. We are what we're able to buy. And then, of course, the problem with that thinking is that, and if you can't be what you want based on what you can buy, we can help you with that, and we can extend all kinds of credit to you, and you can then play this role. You can step out of classism, you can step out of your station, your financial station, and you can go and elevate yourself very quickly with the use of a credit card. Of course, many people do. That's how credit cards are really built in our society. The idea that you're going to step up to the next level, keep spending, and then spend all kinds of time in your life paying for these things that you probably really couldn't afford to begin with. Can you imagine if in Shakespeare's time, right, there was this formalized system of credit cards, how people would be able to have elevated themselves within class and social ranking? I think often about this today in this idea of this mobility, mobility versus sort of nobility. Isn't that interesting that we can jettison ourselves into a whole other class and context with just the use of a credit card? And then additionally, it makes us more attractive to have these things, this idea of attractiveness once again. Yeah, I think we see it also in Tennessee Williams in contemporary drama and plays character. We see it in another one of his plays that became a film. It was also a novel. It's called This Property is Condemned. And it also has these earmarks of how this one character is continuously trying to fix herself up, trying to portray herself in this manner, in this fashion of having all the best things that she can get her hands on in this small Midwestern rural town that has a lot of limitations. She has a lot of limitations. She has a mother that's disinterested. She has a father that's absent. The town itself is very limiting in financial strata, economic development. And this character is continuously trying to put herself together, trying to elevate her status through her beauty. We see this theme frequently. We've been examining it really for thousands of years in all kinds of written works. The idea of, whoever is the most beautiful and the most wealthy gets to really have all of the goodies. We see this in the Miss America contest. We see this in so many different kinds of beauty contests. We see this in bodybuilding, that he who has the most, she who possesses the most, can win the prize. Very dangerous thinking in so many ways when you really think about it. We've all sort of been, I don't know, suggested to that we need to have all these externals, these external cues in order to be accepted. I think often to myself as well, we don't hear much about persons from a variety of communities in literature, plays, etc., especially Shakespeare's time. We don't talk very much about persons that are on the fringe, that are underrepresented, you know, voiceless, the homeless, how it is that they have to sort of scratch by and scavenge in order to be presentable. We don't hear much about that back then. Perhaps it was that these houses were so big and so voluminous, it was easy for people to get work, to have entry-level position, just to even run a kitchen, run a laundry, etc. None of these contemporary conveniences like we have today. You do a load of laundry and there's no rock and there's no washboard and no several days to dry something out. We just put it in the washer, the dryer, and we go. I also think to myself regarding capitalism, critical race theory, all of this social standing. We see this also, of course, in Othello. We see it in Merchant of Venice, who it is that the protagonist is, how it is that people judge the protagonist based on ethnicity, based on skin color. Of course, we see that today. Of course, it becomes germane. Of course, it becomes a reality. So many businesses today, so many different organizations today trying to make a place for everyone. This idea that we all have a place in which we can be part of something. But the reality is that very often many of us are closed out because of gender. We're closed out because of race. We're closed out because of religious freedoms and principles that one might possess, but it's just an unpopular view you know. I think about this often. What would happen if Shakespeare in his time had affirmative action? How different would things have been then? What would have happened if Shakespeare at his time and place had equality for women's work operative? That women are worth the same amount of men, the same amount that men earn. I don't know. Maybe his plays would have been much different and influenced differently. Maybe the idea that we see today, back to Tennessee Williams' Glass Menagerie, we have a protagonist character, the mother. She's very interesting. And her name, you know, sort of resonates for us through the whole play itself, that her name is only as good as what she can put forward, having to sort of show the world that she's capable of much more than sight unseen in her apartment, her humble abode. Why is she going through all this? Because she wants to market her daughter Laura to really find a man. And in order to find a man, her mother keeps sort of fashioning her in all kinds of new goods and consumables. Before this fellow comes, the gentleman caller comes for dinner in the home. She's changing the house. She's buying new slip color covers. She's buying pillows. She's getting out the finest china because she wants to present better than what everyday life must look like in their home. We have this today. We have this sort of self-consciousness sometimes about ourselves. We really haven't changed. I keep saying the same thing, and I've said it for decades, that literature and characters, setting, all these necessary functions really sort of remind us, the general us, on who it is that we are and how it is that we define ourselves. What is it that we own and what is it that we possess? And does it really define who it is that we are? Very often you see teenagers. I can attest to this one because I had three teenagers in my life that like to shop. Maybe you can relate you know. And very often I have a daughter at the time when she was a teenager, she'd only want to go to specific stores and they had to be a specific brand. And it was very important to her. And I'm not judging, I'm just saying it was just very important to her. Yet I have another child who's leaving his teen years shortly. He'll be 18 in this spring. And he's really a rather dynamic shopper in a way because he doesn't care what store and what brand it is, as long as he likes it and he feels good in it. He puts it together with all kinds of things. He feels probably more stability within himself as it relates to fashion, as it relates to how people judge him. He doesn't seem to need a lot of labels and a lot of these externals in order to validate his feelings about himself. Just very interesting to make these observations. I too am one of these similar shoppers where if I like it, I don't care where it came from, I'm going to buy it. And I don't care what anybody thinks about it. When people ask me, where did you get it? I tell them the truth. I don't, pepper or bolster it with some lie that it came from another store. I don't care what people think. Again, if I like it, I buy it. So it's just sort of interesting as I close this little lecture cast for you today in my observations. People come to all kinds of places and things to find this personal harmony, to be self-reflective, to say, I want to see what my value is. I want people to see my value for what I think it should be noted. I think to myself, very often we make the mistake, and I think Shakespeare delivers this for us. I know Tennessee Williams delivers this for us, that we make this mistake that often who we are and our substance is derived from the validation of somebody else. Whereas I think, which again, remember, I'm not right, I'm not wrong. I'm just sharing with you an observation. Of course, you have your own that works for you. I think for myself that who I am is intrinsic. It comes from me. I set the tone. What I believe about myself is true, not what somebody else believes about me is true. I think about this in the arts, when people paint for the purpose of getting other validation, they write for the purpose of getting other validation, right? They perform for the purpose of other people's validation. They rewrite lyrics for the audience validation. That's a much different philosophy than writing for self, painting for self. I see it in the land of editorial design. When very often an editor will say, "Oh, I like this character. This character possesses a lot of excellent qualities. Could you just change these few things and then we'll publish your short story, we'll publish your poem, we'll publish your play." And very often people say internally or even externally, "I'll do anything to be published." Well, I don't know. I don't know. I prefer to be that person. I've sort of always maintained that I'm going to write the character the way I want the character. I'm going to write the dynamic, the scene, the tone, the setting, the way I feel it should be written. And if somebody wants to publish it, great, as is. And if somebody doesn't wish to do that, I'm going to have to accept that. I don't want to have to put anything that doesn't really have my brand or have my mark or have my my, what could we say? My purposeful creation, to cook a dish, say, to even cook a recipe, and one says, "Oh, if you just fix this, you fix that," famous bakers that have said over time, "I'm glad I didn't listen to other people about changing recipes. I went with what I felt was the right thing to do. People loved it. People thought it was beautiful. People ate it." That's what I like, that whole idea of personal integrity. I think to myself, how would Shakespeare have been treated and received in today's market, in today's world, if he was going to continue to stick to his character development, what it is that he thought deserved to be conveyed to audience? Just something to think about. Finally, as it relates to beauty, in another one of Tennessee Williams' plays, very important play, Streetcar Named Desire, and in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, he brings us two women in these plays that, of course, possess amazing amounts of beauty. I mean, tribute beauty. And he has them fashioned low cleavage, all kinds of very seductive clothing at all times, fully made up, looking very glamorous at all times. And he's telling us, of course, that because of this glamour and this external portrayal, he tells us this in the plays. He says that's why they get the attention that they get. That's why they're taken seriously, because they possess all this beauty. They can sort of masterfully get people to do what it is that they want them to do. There was this interesting study. I can find it for you if you really want to study it more. But there was this study several years ago about psychology and beauty and the reference of beauty and accepting beauty and power and beauty. They had a bunch of kindergarten students that they split into two groups. Sort of a famous study. And they produced culturally what all of us thought was definitely a person of beauty. So they produced one female teacher for half of these kindergarten students that possessed all the qualities, cultural context of what we think beauty was at the time. And we then produced a person in very average exterior to this other set of kindergartens, and it was found out through that study and many other formalized studies similar to it that children responded to the prettiest teachers. They were well behaved for the prettiest teachers, most handsome teachers. So is it that we respond to beauty differently, you know? And it's just an honest question, I guess I leave you with. Do we respond to people that we feel are more attractive? Do we shop based on attractiveness? Do we shop based on appeal? Do we react based on what we see as aesthetic? Obviously, in this picture, I go to this place because it's so beautiful. There are many places that are local, closer to me that I could access easily, but they don't possess this beauty. So I'll leave you with those thoughts today. Blessings to you. Always, find things that make you happy, feel satisfied, etc., and go live your life and be positive whenever possible. You have a great day.